Good afternoon everyone, and thank you for coming to our session on Indigenous engagement and participation. First up, I acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna peoples, and I acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal people present. And I acknowledge my own ancestors, the Darug people of the Hawkesbury River. My name is Maddison Miller, and I'm an archaeologist at Heritage Victoria. But more importantly, I'm the co-chair of the Indigenous Advisory Group for the Clean Airs and Urban Landscapes Hub. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, so you're going to have to excuse me. I'm going to have to use an acronym, and I'm going to call it CAUL. I'm a government employee, so I always use acronyms. I'm here with Dr. Cathy, the knowledge broker of the CAUL Hub, to present our work under the National Environmental Science Program to increase Indigenous engagement and participation. Now, it sounds a bit daunting, increasing Indigenous engagement within research projects, especially science projects, but I hope that today I can show you that we are on our way to establishing meaningful and reciprocal relationships between the CAUL researchers and the Aboriginal community. Now, I'm not one for reinventing the wheel, so I thought I'd show you some of the flash videos we've made that I think really capture the vision of sorry, I just got my water. Really capture the vision of the Indigenous Advisory Group. At the end of the presentation, there's going to be heaps of times for questions and discussion, and Cathy and I would love to hear if you've been working on similar projects and your approaches to Indigenous engagement and participation. We felt that the IAP2 conference would be the perfect place to present our work, as we believe that the IAP2 program is at the forefront of good facilitation, and wanted to further understand how practitioners engage with Indigenous peoples and stakeholders, and how that can inform our work at CAUL. Just a note before I get stuck in, I'll be using the words Aboriginal and Indigenous interchangeably throughout, and I just want to note that I'm being inclusive of all Aboriginal nations, as well as the Torres Strait Islands and other island nations. CAUL is one of 6 key hubs under the Australian Government's National Environmental Science Programs, running from 2015 to 2021. CAUL is a hub of researchers working on a variety of projects which cover clean air, biodiversity, urban greening, urban systems like planning and building and transport. The researchers come from a consortium of 4 universities: the University of Melbourne, RMIT University, the University of Western Australia and the University of Wollongong. The hub is multidisciplinary, with expertise in air quality, urban ecology, urban planning, urban design, public health and green infrastructure, with research focused around 5 key projects. Some of those projects include clean air models for Western Sydney and revitalising and repopulating urban spaces with native plants and animals. The Indigenous Advisory Group does exactly what the name suggests. It advises the researchers. Primarily, the Indigenous Advisory Group is concerned with how the researchers are hitting their engagement and participation targets and at what level. We provide a level of guidance to the researchers, as well as assessment of their key performance indicators. In terms of overall structure, the CAUL Indigenous Advisory Group sits at equal value to the steering committee, which the chair of the Indigenous Advisory Group has a seat. You can see on this chart that we really do inform the entire project. So now would be one of the perfect times to show you one of those videos that I promised at the beginning. It was hard for me to wrap my head around the intricacies of the CAUL and the National Environmental Science Program, so I can't expect you to in this short presentation. The video I'm about to play articulates the Indigenous Advisory Group's vision for what the articulates the Indigenous Advisory Group's vision for what Indigenous engagement and participation should look like and what it should mean in the urban context. This was produced by members of the Indigenous Advisory Group with Indigenous filmmaker Alison Page, who you may recognise from the ABC's The Inventors.
Not so long ago, this land was a wilderness. Aboriginal people existed within nature as a connected and balanced component of the whole. Over 200 years, Australia's population has swelled to millions, disrupting the delicate relationship between people and country that has existed here for thousands of years. We've created complex systems, layers of infrastructure built by necessity to support transport commodities and resources, social and physical human needs. Massive cities, hammering their footprint into the earth. But these cities are still Aboriginal places, and Aboriginal voices are ready and waiting to be heard. As technology races us into the next century, it's becoming clear that our modern systems are far from optimal. We've become unbalanced. The very scale of modernity and the ever-increasing demands on the cities we live in have separated us from values that successfully sustained Aboriginal life here for 50,000 years. These core values ensured that every action and innovation supported a sustainable balance between land and community. Individualism was present, but always deferred to the benefit of the whole. Aboriginal cultural values are still about that ongoing connectedness to land and community, but it's so much more than that. It's about the connectedness between us and all things: the sea, the stars, the sky, the water, the ground, all of it. Indigenous culture also values kinship and the importance of family. This enlivens and enriches the most integral layer of any city, and that layer is us. So can we imagine building new systems into the future, considering not only environmental and community aspects, but also the more intangible elements of a society: emotional, creative, and spiritual well-being? We can innovate and enhance our future cities by connecting with Indigenous people and knowledge. Let's have new conversations about planning, biodiversity and climate change, where Aboriginal culture and Western convention coexist. This means working together in a meaningful and innovative way towards a truly common purpose. This means looking at the design of our cities in a new way. We need to see our buildings and public spaces as living systems. Urban design into the future from an Aboriginal perspective is about combining traditional knowledge with new technology to promote social, cultural and environmental well-being. So how can we connect a country in a thriving metropolis in a meaningful way? And can Indigenous beliefs have a real voice in cities? Can we start to view cities as living systems to design and build with a holistic rather than a random approach? And importantly, how thoroughly can these concepts be retrofitted into our existing social and physical human systems? We have a real opportunity to lead the world by creating healthier cities that are grounded with Aboriginal cultural values, a new vision for Australian innovation, design and sustainability. We have over 50,000 years of caring for country. If we apply that knowledge to caring for our urban places, we will create more livable cities for all people. A genuine sense of sustainability into the future.
Alright, so that's our deadly little video we've got, and it's available on our website if you want to check it out. I don't know the website off the top of my head. Oh, there it is. Alright, so I'm working off my iPad because I want to do Flash, but it's not that great. So I think that video really captures the big vision of the Indigenous partnership in the research. And with the broader aim of this film is to encourage all people working within design and planning to really think about the contribution that Indigenous knowledge could have. We've shown it to a lot of our partners and stakeholders, and I want to encourage you to think about how you could use this film as well. This film was developed as part of our Indigenous Engagement and Participation Strategy. CAUL, like all of the National Environmental Science Program hubs, was set the challenge by the Australian Government to increase Indigenous engagement and participation. They make it a requirement of the contract, which is certainly an interesting way to motivate the researchers. What it did do was put Indigenous engagement and participation at the forefront. What the Indigenous Advisory Group did not want to see, however, was engagement that was in any way tokenistic or any appropriation of Aboriginal culture. As an Aboriginal person, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen the stick a boomerang on an approach. One of the issues the Indigenous Advisory Group, I know this should be going through, but anyway. One of the issues the Indigenous Advisory Group identified early on was the challenge of getting people to think about urban environments as Aboriginal places. I went to a book launch recently, Friday actually, and Wurundjeri Elder Bill Nicholson performed a Welcome to Country. Uncle Bill spoke about the importance of Melbourne City, of Naarm, to his people. He spoke of intangible heritage, of songlines that exist despite the city that is built there. Aboriginal culture cannot be eradicated from the urban environment. Indigenous peoples are not just found in remote communities in the outback. Aboriginal authenticity is not just found in the Kimberley. Aboriginal people are in cities and in urban spaces. Urban Aboriginal people still practice culture, but often this goes ignored. Aboriginal knowledge in cities is an underutilised source. There is a real opportunity for meaningful projects. There's a real opportunity for city planners, urban designers and built environment practitioners to start providing meaningful projects in partnership with urban Aboriginal peoples, and not just only the traditional custodians of those places, but there's also an enormous opportunity to partner with Aboriginal people from traditional cultures all across the country that are living in these urban spaces. There are Aboriginal architects, engineers, filmmakers, researchers, planners, all of whom bring not only their knowledge of their field, but also their knowledge from their communities and their lived experiences as Aboriginal people. With this in mind, we wanted to stress to the CAUL researchers that engagement with Aboriginal people isn't just with the traditional custodians, but also about engaging with themes and topics in the built environment from Aboriginal perspectives. It's about meaningful engagement, where reciprocation and respect are at the heart. Indigenous knowledges are hard-earned. For Aboriginal people, we know that our law and traditions and our traditional knowledges can take your entire life to learn. Unlike Western knowledge, you can't just Google it. Knowledge is important and sacred and central to our being. So we wanted to give our researchers tools and a guide to Indigenous engagement and participation. For the Indigenous Advisory Group, it's not just about best practice. It's our reputations in our communities that can be jeopardised if we're endorsing poor engagement. One of the steps we took to establishing these tools was a workshop we held with community members, researchers and other key stakeholders. As I was not there, I can't really speak to it, but luckily for us it was filmed. And I'll now show you part of that workshop now. And I'm going to stop it at about 4 minutes, hopefully.
Contrary to popular belief, which is that everyone thinks about Aboriginal communities as being in remote places, the majority of Aboriginal people live in cities and in regional areas. Cities are Aboriginal places. Too often people think of Kakadu, well that's an Aboriginal place. They don't think of Melbourne as an Aboriginal place, but it is. So we talked about a variety of different things. We had people talking about what's worked well in the past, what are some really important protocols that people should be putting in place. We also looked at what hasn't worked well, and then we've really tried to get an insight from people about what they've learnt over these 2 days. What thinking did they have when they came in here, and how might that have changed over these 2 days?
I think that Aboriginal people have often been excluded from the conversation about planning and the way we think about biodiversity in cities. So I think that out of this we'll see Aboriginal people talking about cities and culture with communities that they don't always have that conversation with.
I hadn't thought about the complexity of the cultural significance that exists in urban contexts and in the dynamic nature of communities in urban systems where the majority of Indigenous people can't speak for that country, although they might have long association with the particular place where they're living.
Being able to bring people from all around the country and from different disciplines has been fantastic because each discipline has its own nuances, its own subtleties that need to be understood.
Climate change is something that the City of Melbourne's been thinking about a lot, but until now we haven't been thinking about how we can incorporate Indigenous knowledge to help us with perhaps the biggest and greatest challenge of our time, it would be really interesting and valuable and add an extra dimension to my research if I can engage with local Indigenous people and other Indigenous groups, people who may have their own particular connections to the frogs and the birds and the other species that I study.
Where we really want people to think more about how does caring for country apply in the city. Now, it's not just a concept that applies to remote communities, but the city is an Aboriginal place and we need to be caring for country in there as well. But also it's a chance for non-Aboriginal people to engage in culture, I think, through this idea of caring for country. So they can see it not as some other thing that's aside from them, but how they can actually participate in caring for country and participate in Aboriginal culture.
The opportunity to re-engage and re-educate and re-enchant Australian public with Indigenous history, Indigenous culture, doing that in an urban setting is a really exciting prospect. The synergies there are really fantastic.
We start to look at this from an Aboriginal perspective, actually caring for country or placing value and respecting country, that we start to see huge benefits, so not just environmentally and from a sustainability perspective, but also in the way that we start to plan a new space so that people that are currently on the fringes or excluded from the city can actually come back in and use the same space that people from privileged backgrounds are able to use.
I think one of the real challenges that you might have discussed over these 2 days is around how do you find the right people to engage with, but also how do you find a way of giving some value to the people you're engaging with, because no one wants to have someone come and talk to them if it's of no benefit to them. So how do you work out what is going to be the value for the Aboriginal community you're going to be talking to?
Whenever we come into the space of researchers, we're coming in with a long and not always glorious heritage. There's kind of a lot of work that's got to be done from the very beginning.
Research bodies have 1 year grant or a 2 year grant or a 3 year grant. But we know when you work with Indigenous communities, you have to be in for the long term. You have to be in to develop a relationship, to develop a partnership.
Alright, we'll just stop that on there. Sorry. Alright, so as you can see from that workshop, one of the biggest outcomes was being aware of the misunderstandings that engagement with Indigenous people in knowledge can occur and should occur in cities. The vast bulk of the 2-day workshop was spent understanding how engagement with researchers in the past has failed and how CAUL should work towards a better approach. Coming out of that workshop, it became apparent that the CAUL research group had limited, if any, working relationship with Indigenous peoples. The Indigenous Advisory Group needed to establish a framework that would help them establish their own relationships and processes for increasing engagement and participation, whilst trying to avoid repeating the bad practices of the past. However, at this point, the research was already underway, which is less than ideal, and we needed to increase engagement and participation as soon as possible, but also to retrofit a new framework into the existing CAUL program. So we embarked on a process of establishing this framework, a framework that produced meaningful engagement and encouraged researchers to form long-term relationships with Indigenous communities, whilst being mindful of the researchers' capacity and the resources of the Indigenous community, noting that within the CAUL main research projects and associated activities, there was some unique and exciting opportunities, even with the limited scope. And if you think that sounds daunting, you'd be right. Our hub worked with two of the other national environmental science program hubs, the Northern Australian Resources Hub and the Tropical Water Hub, who've been actively working with Indigenous knowledge and peoples for a long time. Using the monitoring and evaluation framework provided by the Department of Environment and Energy, we worked backwards to establish a framework for Indigenous engagement and participation. The framework works on the principle that there are 3 types of projects in relation to their potential for Indigenous engagement and participation. It's our 3-category approach, which I'll be talking about soon. Each of these 3 project categories have a series of activities underneath them, which the researchers use as a starting point for meaningful engagement. We recognise that not all activities are achievable for every research group. However, it is important that they can justify why they completed some activities and not others. The cyclical review of the research plans, of which the Indigenous Engagement and Participation Strategy must include, provides the Indigenous Advisory Group a means of monitoring and evaluating progress. The beauty of approaching it within an established monitoring framework means that we have a means to review the progress on an annual basis. with a template the Research Hub are already using to assess all their activities. I'll now run through the 3 category approach, and you can see in front of you Cathy's already distributed the matrix, which is how we assessed and assigned categories 1 and 2. If you want to take a second to look at that, and I can maybe answer some of any questions while you have a look at that, and then we'll move on to the categories of approach. You don't need to follow along. It's just this is how we retrofitted into that deliverables framework that they were already working. So the expectations of a category 1 project. Right, so we assessed all of the projects within the CAUL Hub and assigning categories and suggested activities. The Category 1 research project is one that the Indigenous Advisory Group saw massive potential for. We expected these projects to have direct collaboration with the community. So these are the expectations under a Category 1 project. We expected to see on these projects that we assigned the Category 1 to, that the researchers clearly identify how the research is a benefit to the community, the Aboriginal community. I think this is a really important expectation. So this computer keeps flashing at me. Okay. We didn't spoon feed them on how to do this. This is something we did want them to think about critically themselves. The IAG saw that there are a number of projects that sat clearly in a Category 1, but also a number of Category 2 projects that could aspire to be or take parts of a Category 1. As the research is reviewed yearly, there is potential for them to upgrade and evolve their Indigenous engagement and participation strategies along the way. As you can see in front of you, there are a number of activities under each objective. The researchers don't have to do them all, but they do need to make clear and have clear reasoning for the activities that they are doing and that they are not doing. Some activities are an expectation, such as completing cross-cultural awareness training and remunerating elders for their welcome to country ceremony. And you think you need a pretty strong reason not to do those things. A Category 2 project sits somewhere in the middle of a 1 and a 3. When assigning a Category 2, the discussion with the Indigenous Advisory Group would be around the potential for the project as well as the resources available. In an ideal world, a lot of these projects would be a Category 1. For instance, there is a project looking at clean air models for the western suburbs of Sydney. This project was mostly modelling of air quality and a small field component, where they installed weather stations at universities. On paper, this looked like a Category 2, a small field component with no direct collaboration. But we challenged the researchers to look at the Category 2, but also to think about a Category 1. For instance, have they thought about Aboriginal calendars? The Eurocentric 4 seasons calendar doesn't make any sense in the Australian context. So what does the local Aboriginal calendar say about air movements at a certain time of year? Have they spoken to certain people in this community? At the universities where they're installing their weather station, are the Indigenous students studying relevant topics? What opportunities are there for employing Indigenous people? So this is an example of the questions that we were asking the researchers and the ideas that we were putting forward to them to challenge their expectations under the category approach. So the expectations of a Category 2, you can see, are quite similar to those of a Category 1. The main difference is a Category 1 is a project that does have direct collaboration, and a Category 1 empowers the Aboriginal community. A Category 2 might do these things, and there is still an imperative on the researcher to identify where collaboration could occur and to consider Aboriginal people in employment and the use of Aboriginal businesses. And still requires that the research effectively share some knowledge, data and results to the community. Yeah. So Category 3. So the third category is for projects that are largely desktop based. Most of these are often data collection and data collation projects with no field component. So as you can see, the Category 3 project is still expected to share and communicate its research results to the Aboriginal community. This is a common expected goal of all of the categories, and it speaks to the reciprocity that we expect. If you're looking at urban systems data, you can share that with a group such as Indigenous Design and Architecture Victoria, who are a group of Indigenous people working in the built environment in Melbourne. This isn't about telling all Aboriginal people about the research, because I'm sure we don't want to hear about all of it, but it's about finding the relevant groups. Even with the Category 3 projects, we opened it up to the researchers and said to them, even if you're only collecting data, could you hire an Indigenous research assistant or an Indigenous intern? At your university, is there an Indigenous student group that may be interested in any internships? One of the projects is looking at urban systems, and it's really only in a data collecting and collating phase. But coming out of the workshop and the advice of the Indigenous Advisory Group was an idea. What would Indigenous-led research look like? What do Aboriginal people want to know about urban systems? The project that is looking at urban systems is now seeking to employ an Indigenous researcher to start to look at just that. What would Indigenous research look like in the urban planning systems? And that just came out of the Category 3 project. So by way of summary, this is how we believe it aligns against the IAP2 public participation spectrum. Cathy has conducted the IAP2 spectrum chart to show the alignment of our categories to the Indigenous Advisory Group's assigned levels of impact with our interpretation on the impact of Indigenous peoples. We've put an asterisk on the empower because we believe that in all of the categories there is opportunity to increase Indigenous empowerment through employment opportunities. We've established this framework and we have assessed all of the research, and we've provided feedback twice now to the research group, and we'll be working over the next iteration of the research plan to provide more feedback on how they're going. So I'll open up the floor for questions and discussions, and I'd love to hear any feedback you have or about any projects that you've been working on that could or should include Indigenous engagement and participation.